black, or do you want to try a latte?
Latte.
A latte,
Awesome.
salted pistachio, or
Oh, that sounds good. Hot, please.
This is good.
Okay.
I've been really excited about getting you on this on More Coffee Please for a couple reasons. One of those reasons being, that you and I have started to kind of build our own relationship outside of just the mutual connections that we have. But also, now that I'm back in Akron full time, I've been immersing myself in politics and in civics and all of the things that are happening, and you're a big player in those things. Welcome to More Coffee Please. Today we have a very special guest, Margo Sommerville, the president of City Council, executive director, all the good things, but more than anything, this young lady here is a force, and I am extremely honored to have her sitting here in front of me and willing to have this conversation. Definitely stay tuned. Okay, if you want to give a quick introduction, who is Margo?
Well, first, good morning.
Good morning. All that, yes. I know, I'm like right to it.
I know, and it is early, so I'm glad you got coffee.
Yes, cheers.
But yeah, that's a loaded question,
For sure.
Who is Margo? And I think, even though I'm 45 years old, I am a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a business owner, president of Akron City Council. I'm still trying to figure out who is Margo, right? And really figuring out the balancing act, the juggling act, and how I can continue to figure out how I can create more ways and opportunities to just be myself outside of all of the titles, right?
Yes. That's beautiful. So 45, you say you're still figuring things out. Before we go there, I want to go back. Who is the little girl? Who is that? How was she raised? What was her upbringing like?
When I was young, I was always very mature for my age. I got my first job at 10, not because I had to work, right? But because I wanted to. I remember going to my ballet dance teacher and asking her for a job at the age of 10. And she hired me. She created a position. I was like her receptionist and answered the phones, did little things in the office. But for me, that was huge. Again, I didn't have to work. I had parents, and I'm grateful and blessed that they were great providers. But I always wanted to be able to have my own. I was always a hard worker. I always had ambitions and goals. Never really wanted to ask people, can you give me money to do this or this? I want to be able to have it in my own pocket. So that started really young for me. Then I was an older sister to 3 siblings. I took that really seriously, and wanted to be a good example for them. And so that's who I was as a young child. I mean, I think, and it was difficult for us too growing up. You have to understand, when I was young and growing up, my father was in politics too. So that made it different in terms of how I moved and what I was able to do, what I was able to say.
There's a level of responsibility.
It's a level of responsibility. And there's always kind of like a spotlight, right? And that's the thing that people don't understand. Elected officials like myself, we sign up for these roles. But unfortunately, our family, gets tied into it as well, regardless if they signed up or not. And so growing up, that was always kind of just a challenge too. I wanted to make sure that whatever I did, I was doing things that were going to reflect positively, on both of my parents. And so I took that really seriously.
So you were the older sibling of 4. So there's 4 of you guys.
Yes.
And you were the eldest.
Yes.
What did your mother and father instill in you as the eldest, whether it was intentionally or non-intentionally? Because it sounds like you kind of were wearing responsibility. You were wearing the weight of the leadership role that you were born into. What did they instill in you that helped you stay with that versus just being like, I don't want any of this?
You know, growing up, my parents, you know, and a lot of people, they hear the story, they know my father, Margo, and, you know, he was president of NAACP, right? He was the owner of Sommerville Funeral Services. He was Ward 3 council person, president of Akron City Council, you know, went on to become planning director and a candidate for mayor, right? But a lot of people don't understand. It's in my DNA, yes, from my father, but also from my mother, too. You know, my mother was a teacher. She was a part of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, right, which is an organization that I too am a part of, that really believes in leadership but also in service. You know, so for a very young age, you know, we were taught that, you know, when much is given, much is required. You know, and so on Christmases, you know, yeah, we would have our family dinners, you know, we would open up gifts. But we would go to the Haven and we would serve Christmas dinner, you know, and that was just something that we did every single year. You know, we would bag up toys, right, that we weren't using, and we would go and we would give them away to children who were less, didn't have, you know. And so at a very young age, those things were instilled in us. You know, my mother would do a summer school. At our house every summer. We were required to also participate in the summer school, but it was her whole idea of just making sure that, you know, young people in the neighborhood were getting the education that they needed, and they weren't falling behind because it was summertime. You know, and she did these things for free. You know, these things outside of, you know, just her passion and love for wanting to give back in the community. So it has really truly been a real DNA of who I am. And that's how I was raised.
Did you appreciate it?
You know, I think then, absolutely not, you know. And I didn't really understand why we were doing all the things that we were doing. I think it was when I got older that I began to kind of put the puzzle pieces together.
What's older? 16, 18?
Yeah, probably definitely high school.
High school.
You know?
What made that kind of switch for you?
You know, I think, you know, at high school, you're beginning to kind of think about, you know, what your future's going to look like. You know, you're deciding on, you know, what career goals that, you know, you want to achieve. And you're beginning to think about, you know, what your future looks like. And I began to kind of also reflect on, you know, my upbringing. And I remembered some of those things that were instilled in me that really has shaped, of course, you know, who I am today.
I think that's incredible in terms of the things that your family did, but I also understand that can be a lot, you know. What high school did you go to?
I graduated from Firestone.
Graduated from Firestone. Yes. Okay, of course, right? That's why we get along. Did you run for anything in high school? Did you participate in any, you know, anything of that nature? You know, the different groups and programs they had? I
mean, I did, you know, I danced. Okay. People don't know that I danced ballet for 15 years.
For sure, which I think I learned that recently and I was blown away at that fact.
So like in terms of like my ballet dance, I actually advanced all the way to point. Like, so we danced on point, and I hate to say it, but the only reason why I stopped is because I had to think about pretty feet and dancing on point. You know, I'm like, no, I can't do this, so I quit. But I wish I would have stuck with it. You know?
For sure. Yes.
So I danced. I played piano. I played in the band.
Oh, you did everything.
I did. So I was active.
Yeah.
I played tennis. Yeah, for sure.
You still got some of those friendships from some of those groups and things like that now?
Absolutely.
Yeah. If I was to go ask them, like, who is Margo, what do you think they would say about you?
Oh my gosh, I'm afraid what they would say. No.
Because I got to go find them now.
You got to go find them. Yeah. But really and truly, I was really much about my business. I really was, even in high school, you know. I was shy. I was quiet.
Interesting.
You know, so it's kind of interesting now that I'm president of city council, you know, being a person that is kind of was a quiet person, a very behind the scenes type person.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, what I'm doing now has really stretched me and kind of brought me outside of my comfort zone for sure.
Is there anything that you want people to know about you as far as like who you are at home that they don't currently know?
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't have much time at home. You know, but when I am at home, really and truly, I think what people don't know about me, I love the arts. I love to paint. I love to draw.
Yeah.
You know, I love to travel. You know, I love just sitting on my back patio having some coffee,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
You know what I mean? So because I think, you know, with what we do every day, between running a business, you know, leading downtown, you know, we've got to find time to unwind, right?
Yeah.
We got to have time to really just allow our mind to actually take a rest,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not really good at that. I'm trying to be better and be more intentional of that. And so that's why, really and truly, for me, my home really is my sanctuary, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is my place where, you know, hey, listen, you know, I'm not talking about work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to think about work.
Yeah.
You know, I really want to enjoy my family.
Absolutely. And your family being your husband and 2 daughters.
Yes.
That is, you know, I know they are near and dear to your heart. You being a parent now, you're 45, you have a very loaded career. You know, I would say you've done some tremendous things, but it's a lot, right? It's not like you just, you know, accomplished the thing. It's like you're doing the thing right now. What does that look like for your kiddos?
You know, for me, I'm just, it's amazing how much children watch, right? And they're observing.
Yeah.
You know, oftentimes we think that they're not paying attention, but they are paying attention, you know. Even that both of my daughters have come to me and say, listen, we want to go into the funeral business. You know, really? Wow. You know what I mean? To me, that's amazing. But they are watching. They're looking. And again, that's why I do what I'm doing.
Yeah. I love that. So I want to go, I'm going to lean on our cart real quick. You've kind of touched on a lot of this. Now, this is something I think you and I have talked about because of just my general interest and curiosity, but what has sitting with grief in the way that you do, what has it taught you that nothing else could?
I think for me, I have learned mostly, you know, oftentimes we have friction, you know, and conflict with family members and friends, and, you know, I'm not speaking to her, you know, she said this to me, and, you know, whatever. Fix it. Fix it. Life is too short. You know, tomorrow is not promised. You know, so often, you know, we see people on a day-to-day basis who wish they could apologize, right? That they could go back and they could have that conversation. And so for me, that's just really, really, really important. Just living in the moment.
Yeah.
You know, cherishing relationships, keeping people close, telling people that you love them and you appreciate them while you can.
For sure, for sure.
Because so often that we see in my business, you know, people don't get that opportunity. And it is tough.
Yeah.
It is tough because you cannot go back, right? And that makes that grief really heavy.
Do you get numb to it at all?
I think for me, I look at it as a ministry, right? And it's not something that everybody can do because it is a lot, you know? You're meeting with families every day, helping them through the most difficult time of their life, right?
Yeah.
And almost I feel as if I'm like a sponge, right? I'm trying to soak up, you know, all of their pain, right? And all of their grief, and trying to navigate them through a process to make it as easy as I possibly can for them, right? But at the end of the day, right, I have to be able to leave all of that at the office, right? And then go and be a mother and be a wife and be president of Akron City Council.
Absolutely.
And so that is tough. That is difficult. But it's definitely, you know, it's a challenge.
Do you think other people around you in the different places that you go in terms of being a president of City Council or being a wife, do you think those communities take that into consideration? Not, and it's not, I guess I'm not trying to say that in a manner of like, are they respecting, but is it something that people consider? Is there a conversation behind that? The fact that there is a level of grief that you live with and that you have to kind of learn how to cope with all the time that the average person doesn't.
Yeah. No, I don't think people really realize that. And the interesting thing about what I do is, the funeral director and the politician, right? The soft and the sometimes kind of hard, right?
Yeah.
And that balance of that, and having to put on a little bit of a tough exterior when you go downtown, right? And you're fighting and you're championing, for your ward, trying to accomplish the things that you're trying to accomplish. It is tough.
That is some dichotomy that you have to kind of balance. I think what I'm really curious to know is when you are, because for myself, I've realized that I can't really be boxed in. It's really hard for me to be like, hey, I'm going to do this and solely this. It's like I have so many different interests. You've talked about the arts. You talked about the dance, right? You've talked about the funeral home and now, and being the president of city council, but also just the other more interpersonal roles that you play. At what point is balance, I can't even say balance, but reprioritizing, at what point does that take precedence over everything? Because you have to do all the things, but at some point there has to be some give and take.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that it's tough, right? Because you do have to kind of figure out, where, what is your priority and what's most important. And again, that's just an area that I'll just be honest, I'm not good in, and I'm trying to be better in that space, particularly just in the space of self-care. Oftentimes, we give and we give and we give, particularly those who serve the public. And both of my jobs, we serve the public. We're giving and we're giving, and we're kind of like the last on the totem pole. And so again, I'm working to be better in that space of balancing that and making sure that I'm not losing myself and giving myself the attention that I need.
You ever heard of the 4-burner theory? Did we talk about this before?
No, we didn't.
It's an interesting framework to think through. Essentially, if you're cooking on a stove and you have all 4 burners on max, none of them are going to actually be at max, right? They're all going to be a little depleted because the gas is not being cycled correctly, right? So with that being said, from a life standpoint, we have about 4 different areas of our life that we can truly focus on at a time, but we can't give everything to every area all at once, right? So let's say we have career, we have our self-care, we have family, we have our spirituality, and at some point 2 of those burners got to get turned off so you can maximize what you're getting out of those areas. I would be curious if it's possible, if there's a way to flow through some of the, I don't run from responsibility, and it sounds like you don't run from it either. You kind of bear it, right? You take it and you shoulder it. I would be curious to see what that looks like for you in terms of turning a burner off.
Yeah, and that's tough because my whole entire life, I've always juggled so many different things. And I love what I do, right? And I think that's the thing that keeps me going. So it is tough for me to think about, what burner would I turn off, But just being more intentional, just like when you go on the airplane, right? What do they tell you? In case of emergency, put your face mask on first, right?
Sure,
you know what I mean? So just keeping that in mind. But I love what I do, and that gives me the drive and passion to continue to keep going. So it is really tough for me to really figure out, what burner would I turn off.
I think that's something you should definitely explore a little bit.
I will.
I would be very curious to know how you would kind of reorganize, because there's no wrong answer.
Yep. Right.
It's really just what is important right now. Where do I need to maximize my attention and my energy? Maybe it's yourself, but then also maybe it's a different piece in this season. So I'm curious about that actually. So we're
still trying to figure it out.
We're gonna follow up on that.
We don't have it all the way figured out yet.
So, all right, this is a good question. So this is more about like your career right now as far as being the president of city council. Mm-hmm. What's the hardest part of holding power when not everyone agrees?
Yeah. That is tough. Because the thing about it is that, we're not always going to agree, right? And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think what we have to figure out is that although I don't agree with you on everything, it's okay to have spirited debates.
Yeah.
But we have to make sure that we remain to keep respect in place, right? We got to be able to come back to the table.
Yes.
Come back and have the conversation. Because guess what? We're going back and forth on this issue. There's going to be another issue, right? That we've got to talk about that issue too, right?
Absolutely.
So, it's okay to be on opposite sides of the table. But we got to be able to find out, where is the middle? Where's the compromise?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm always trying to find, right? Bringing people together to say, where's the middle? Where can we agree on?
Mm-hmm.
We know our differences, but what are some of the things that we can agree on?
Yeah.
And focus on those things and work on those things collectively together.
In that breath of civility, essentially, is what you're talking about. I will say this. I have a friend who has been a pioneer in my life as far as politics. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a little bit, right? And most people don't know this. There's a very small group of people in my life who actually know this season of my life, but I was very rebellious. So I was in high school and I started a t-shirt brand, and the second season of clothing that I created was all about kind of rebelling against the system. And I had a shirt that it said "Nothing for President." And it was a conversation starter for sure. Like, what does that mean? Nothing. I'm the idea is that the president is just, and this was, a 15-year-old me talking, but it was like the president is a mascot. You know what I mean? Like, really, he doesn't have any power. So I had all these very supercharged ideas about what government and politics stood for. I was reading the Dalai Lama's book, and I was John Lennon. I was very much so on this kind of very far off journey. And I'm glad I took that journey. But the reason I say that is because as I got into my professional career as a gym owner and I started training, I was in the heart of Harrisburg, which is the capital of Pennsylvania. And so I was around lobbyists and politicians and all these people who have some type of vested interest. And my good friend, Republican guy, youngest state rep in Harrisburg at one point, gave me something that is so valuable that I can't really put a number on it. Mm-hmm. But being that he was a Republican, there's always this kind of brand. You're immediately like, this is who this person is. He challenged all of those ideas that I had, especially as a young black man who was raised in a Democratic household. We didn't talk about politics, but I was kind of like, if I vote, I'm voting Democrat, obviously, right? I'm a black man, I'm a minority. Again, the brand was what it was. And I'm still politically adjacent. I don't necessarily subscribe, right, to any one party, but I certainly had a clear vision on what politics meant to me personally. What does it mean to be invested in politics? What does it mean to have an opinion, whether I'm far right, far left, in the middle, and be able to share that opinion with you and get pushback and try to find that common ground? His brand is civility. It is going into a room, having a dialogue with people from all different races, backgrounds, languages, everything, and saying, okay, what are we all shooting for? What's the goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? So the reason I bring that up and give you that context is I've been sitting in the rooms, right, and I've been watching the conversations. What are we trying to accomplish right now as Akron? What are we trying to do, and where are we really struggling at in terms of trying to get everyone on board?
Right. I'm going to say more coffee. So Austin, we're going to bring you to Akron City Council, right? And we're going to have you bring coffee because, again, I love this idea of coffee and conversation because it has to start with a conversation.
Yeah.
Just as you kind of shared that story, having a relationship with someone who had completely different political views as you, right? It starts with a conversation to really find out, hey, listen, we've got more in common than we don't, right? Mm-hmm. And it's tough because we live in a society that is so divided, right? People seem very angry, right? Because of everything that's happening, right? Life is difficult, right? Grocery prices are going through the roof, it's hard to find affordable housing. People are living in housing conditions that are not suitable, right? they're dealing with landlords who are slum landlords, who are taking all their money and they're not getting what they should be getting in terms of housing that is suitable for their families, right? Received a phone call from a mother who was crying, right? Her home, her car got shot up just a couple nights ago, right? A home that she owns, right? She can't walk away from her home and leave this neighborhood that's really been taken over by gun violence, right? So there's so much going on that people are dealing with every day, and we have to figure out how we can come to the table, be able to have conversations, and really think about real solutions to solve these problems. And they've got to be bold solutions, and we've got to make tough decisions. And we have to begin to think outside the box in terms of how we can address the issues that are impacting our community.
Something that I think about when it comes to bold decision making, as I addressed earlier, I think from a leadership standpoint and being boots on ground, it's really important that we are having a conversation, right? We're making decisions. I think I shared this thought with you before, but that is, those who are in power and they make decisions will always be looked at as the enemy when those inflicted by or that are suffering the consequences of those decisions without a conversation. Absolutely. Right? And so I think even those, and I personally, I toe the line. I'll say that, like, I can go to some of the rougher neighborhoods in Akron or anywhere for that matter, really, and come out with a good friend, and be really good and close buddies with a lot of the guys. Some of them have guns, some of them have charges. But then I can also go into a room and have a conversation with politicians and millionaires and business people and things of that nature. And I think not being afraid of those types of rooms, I think having unrefined spaces and refined ideas, vice versa, unrefined ideas in refined spaces is something that we have to challenge each other with. Especially in politics, and especially now where, when we're looking at, a national level of politics or kind of just like ping pong and it's just all over the place. And a lot of people are confused and worried. And, when we have confusion, a lot of times that turns into fear, and that fear turns into anger, and that anger turns into, things are now getting out of control. And so for our little corner of the world here, I think we have a responsibility to do what we can do the best, right? Me, it's serving good coffee and having good conversations. And for you, it's being a leader of this community, also being a Black woman in this. Now, let me ask you this. I have two questions for you in terms of that, because I don't want to lose this. Does being a Black woman, is that something that, I want to be careful how I ask this, but does it matter? Is it something that you're like, I'm a Black woman, or are you a woman in power versus being, I'm a Black woman in power? How do you look at that?
I mean, for me, I am a Black woman, and for me, I am the first Black woman to serve as president of Akron City Council, right? And it took 100 years for us to get here, right? And so for me, that is huge. And for me, there comes a great responsibility for that. So for me, I got to make sure that it don't take another 100 years for there to be another person who looks like me sitting in my seat, right? So there's a responsibility there to make sure that we're creating a pipeline of leadership of other young Black girls and Black women who are ready to step into position, in positions of power and to lead. So for me, I take that very seriously.
Does faith play a role in your leadership roles? I know you talked about being the director of your funeral services and things of that nature at your ministry. How does that lead into the other works that you have? I think you definitely have to have faith, right? Because oftentimes we look around and everything looks so grim. It's heavy. You come out of meetings and you hear the data. And the numbers, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is a lot. And I think we have to be able to have faith, right? We have to be able to have hope, right? That we're going to be able to navigate, a lot of these issues and problems, and that it's not always going to be the way it is, and that we've overcome, right?
and we've evolved over time, right? And so, these issues that we're facing now, we'll be able to overcome these as well. And so I think faith is really, really important.
Okay. That's good. I think something, again, that I've started to learn in terms of being boxed in, and also I've been asked on several occasions, like, oh, are you going to get into politics? I think a lot of that's just who I'm associated with. But they also see like a black man that's articulate and business savvy, and they automatically assume that there's some type of like ulterior motive in terms of me trying to run for mayor or some type of political party. And I have really no interest in that at all. I think I'm okay with being able to move around without those type of strings attached to me. You know what I mean? And I say that from the place of, I used to say, this is kind of messed up, but I used to say I thought teachers were like slaves. Like, I used to really look at, like, I felt bad for teachers. And I still do, because I actually know a lot of teachers now that I'm 31. A lot of my friends are teachers, right? And it's like they have to go and pay for their own materials, and if they're teaching in a bad neighborhood, they have to be the mothers and fathers for those kids. I experienced it myself as a coach. Now, why that matters is because I talked to my buddy, and I said, man, I want to get things done. Maybe I'll run for some, I considered, I'm like, maybe I'll do X, Y, Z. He's like, look, dude, if you want the work to get done, just do it.
Thank you. And I think that's the part, right? People think that you have to have a position. You have to have a title. Your name has to be on the ballot. Absolutely not. Everybody has to play their role in their position, and everybody can't sit around the horseshoe at Akron City Council, right? Everybody can't sit, at the State House, right? Yeah. We need people actually boots on the ground, right, every day doing the work, right? We need people sitting on boards and commissions, right, that look like me and you, advocating for issues that are important to people in our community, right? So there's all different roles and spaces, but we all have to be able to do our part. And it does not require a title to do it, right? Yeah. It does not require a degree to do it, right? And so getting people to understand that you have power, right? That you have a role to play, that you can make change in your community.
Okay, I got to challenge you on this, right?
Okay.
There's a lot of people, especially black people, who do not believe that. Who will be like, yeah, okay, right? Whether it's my vote doesn't count, or you gonna do what you want to do anyway, regardless if I go to city council and spout off There's a gap of understanding or the ability to feel empowered.
Yes.
Right? People do not feel empowered, and that's not just in Akron. That's everywhere. People feel like the people are empowered that get elected. We elect them, and then they don't follow up, or they don't How do you give us the power? How do we, or rather, how do we just step into our power? Because it's already there, but how do we feel like, okay, you know what? I can step up and I can do X, Y, Z. I can take charge of this little area for myself and my family.
Absolutely. And we got to figure out how we can encourage and motivate people to do just that. Listen, you don't need me as your ward council person, right, to decide what your neighborhood looks like or how to help you address issues, and trying to help people understand you do have the power. Listen, we look at neighborhoods, right? Corner stores who have been issues in neighborhoods for years, but guess what? It's the neighborhood that went down to the Board of Elections. They got a petition, right? They went around, they knocked on their neighbors' doors, they collected signatures, and they dried up the corner. I didn't do that. Right? The residents did that, right? There's power in that. Even when we look at the fact that we have a civilian oversight board in the city of Akron. Yeah. Me as an elected official, I didn't do that, right? That was resident led, right? People went around, they collected signatures, right? And they got it on the ballot. And they went out, knocked doors, and encouraged people to vote for it, and it passed. So I think we have to look at those types of things to remind us, right, that people do have power. People can make differences in their community and create this mindset. If we don't create it, if we don't do it, who else will?
I talked to this gentleman who's a huge developer out in Harrisburg. His father was building in Harrisburg when he was a child, and then his father passed and he took it over. And I sat on a call with him one time, and I said, where do we start? right? And we're talking about just him developing all these properties, which I think is great, but also, you know, when you get so high up, you start missing things, right? Because you have people that take care of those things. So you don't know all of the ins and outs. Now, the reason I'm saying that is that I asked him, I said, what do you do about gun violence? Or what do we do about trash? And he said, you know, everybody needs to start sweeping their own front porch, right? If everybody swept up their own front porch, we will have a cleaner city. And I thought that was so insightful because it does seem a little condescending almost. It could be seen as that, right? Like, dude, you are $1 million, you telling me to go sweep. But the idea is that if every person in Akron was to pick up one piece of trash, there would be no trash on the ground, right? If everybody did that one little piece, and it seems insignificant when you're picking up that one piece of trash because you only responsible for your little, you doing your due diligence, but everybody has to be on the same page when it comes to, hey, we're going to do this, and I'm going to do my part, and I'm not going to worry about what you got going on. We all going to do it together, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting space to be in, and also to kind of go back. You have a lot going on personally. Everybody on city council does. Mm-hmm. The president does. The principals of Firestone and Bookdo, they have a lot going on. We all got these things going on. And I do see a trend of individuals who feel that somebody else is responsible for their destiny. And I think that's a mindset thing. I'm not coming down on them at all. I think that can be trained out of somebody. I think that can be coached out of somebody. I'm going to give you this example, and then I want you to give me your feedback or your response. And that is, when I was a trainer, I would go into these other gyms, these corporate gyms, and I would see somebody working out, and I would be like, somebody will get hurt. A part of me, depending on who it was, would be like, I got to go talk to him and tell him, like, hey, when you do it this way. But what happens is when you go approach that person, you immediately get this like, I know what I'm doing. You know, don't worry about me. I got it. There's this kind of like, they don't want to hear nothing from nobody. That's not just a gym thing. Mm-hmm. That's anywhere in the world. If I go tell somebody, yo, like, do this, they gonna be looking at me like, bro, who is you? How do we get rid of that so that we can actually start collaborating and having more civility and being able to communicate across the board, across streets, across, you know, where is that fix?
I think we gotta start with trust. And I know it's tough, you know what I mean? Particularly when you look at government, you know, that, you know, even my neighborhood, you know, I represent Ward 3, right? Which is a neighborhood that has a lot of poverty. You know, we have pockets in our neighborhoods where there were things, particularly I think of Summit Lake, right? There was a lot of things that were promised to the people who live in the Summit Lake neighborhood, and they were never delivered upon, right? And so when I got elected, it was really tough for me to go to the neighborhood and try to connect with constituents because, listen, we've heard that before, mm-hmm. you know, and mm-hmm. we didn't see anything. You know, what makes you different? And they really challenged me, you know, which I think is a good thing. And I think as government, we have to do a lot of what we've done in Summit Lake. This whole idea is that, listen, we're going to listen, but we're going to show you that we're not only listening, but we've heard you. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to make things happen. So then that way you can see.
How do you do that? How do you show them?
So for example, you know, some of the things that we did in Summit Lake, you know, we talked about trying to beautify Summit Lake. You know, mm-hmm. Summit Lake, you know, for so long was considered a scary place. People didn't even want to come to Summit Lake. Like, we didn't even think of the lake as an asset. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. And the crazy thing about Summit Lake is there was only one bench at Summit Lake, and the bench didn't even face the lake. Yeah. You know? So we talk with residents saying, hey, listen, what do you want to see in this space? You know, what would make you use and bring your family to this space? And so we heard, well, people said, listen, we would like to come down and we would like to sit around the lake and actually be able to see the lake from a seat. You know, we want to come down and we want to grill. You know, we want to be able to host, you know, cookouts and birthday parties. So when we began to hear those things, these were little small things that we could easily do, right? That really didn't cost a whole lot. Yeah, let's put out a few grills.
Yeah.
You know, let's create some benches. And the benches that we created, we actually had young people build them. The very first benches we had at Sommerville, we had them build them because, again, we wanted young people to say, this is our space. I made that, I built that, I contributed this to my neighborhood, right?
Absolutely.
And so they began to kind of see what was possible. And that's how we were able to build trust.
I see.
You know what I mean? I think that's important. We have to work on building trust. We can't just say we're going to do something. We got to be intentional. And even we test ideas and concepts, you know, until we can fully find the funding, fully flesh it out. But people need to be able to see it in order to be able to believe it. You know, so it starts with trust. You know, we got to make sure that there's a seat at the table for people. You know, for so often, you know, there's never been a seat, you know, unless you were smart and savvy enough to bring your own chair and, you know, kind of knock people out the way and create a spot, right?
Yeah.
But as government, we need to make sure there's a seat at the table for the community, right? So they can play an active role. Listen, this is their community, you know? For me, I'm not going to be on Akron City Council forever, right? We need to make sure that we have people at the table who can take over and who can, you know, begin to take things to the next level.
That leads me to my next question, which is, there's a level of trust, and then there's also a level of loyalty that people want to experience. They want to know that they are going to be heard, and not just heard from a standpoint of like, I'm hearing you and I do care, but also that I'm going to be loyal to you when things get tight, or when somebody comes knocking at the door asking me about X, Y, and Z, like, I'm going to have your back. What does that look like for you as an individual? Not even as a city council, but as an individual. What does loyalty look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, loyalty, you know, for me is just, you know, just being willing to just to show up, you know, and really and truly, that sounds easy.
Until
but you know, it's not easy. You know, it is difficult to ask people to continue to show up, particularly when, you know, they've shown up so many other times and nothing has happened, right? I think people are getting to this place really of fatigue. They're tired, right? We're tired of filling out the survey, right? We're tired of participating in the forums and the town halls, you know, and so we really have to figure out, you know, how we can move past that. So showing up is a big thing, and if we can get people to show up, and we can get people in the room, and we can get people to have a seat at the table, so that, you know, they do have a voice, and they see that they also have their hand in shaping and helping us to solve some of these issues. I think it's huge, because the reality of it is that, guess what? You know, me as president of Akron City Council, I don't have all the answers, you know, nor do all of my colleagues that sit around the horseshoe, right? And so we do need and rely on our residents and constituents to help us navigate and find real solutions for real neighborhood problems that people are dealing with every day.
To kind of circle back a little bit, so you, again, play a lot of different roles. Your husband, I'm sure he's a big player in some of the things that you have going on. What does that look like in terms of your relationship? You not being able to be at home, he's a busy man as well, some of the work that he does. How do you guys make it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, particularly, not even as a president of the city council, but, you know, if you're married to a funeral director, you know, you're going to get the late midnight calls, you know, someone's passed away, and you got to go into the office, had vacations cut short. We get a death call, you know, family friend or somebody, I got to be there to help serve and service. So that is tough, right? Again, even on the politics side of things, you know, again, I signed up for this. You know, my husband didn't necessarily sign up for this. So, you know, my enemies, you know, also, you know, become their enemies, you know, and it gets to be and can be a lot, you know.
Yeah.
So again, you gotta have a spouse who is understanding of all of that, because they really are sharing you with so many people.
Yeah. I think it's important that these discussions are had, because in my experience, being in the military, they tell you the same thing. You're not joining the military by yourself, right? Your husband or wife is also joining the military, you know, in a different capacity, yes, but they're still experiencing that same level of separation and anxiety and like what's happening, and you know, and even further when there's children involved, and then also when you start to get further along in your career, whatever that career is, whether it's a fireman or a police officer, there's this level of like, man, you don't know what's going to happen next, and there's this like, again, sharing your person with the community or the region or whatever that looks like for you. I think we have to talk about more of the family dynamic and how we can support that, because I think too, we're also in a very interesting place in society where people are making a decision at this point. It's not even like, oh, we're gonna figure it out. It's like career or family. People are like deciding, especially like women. It's like, I'm gonna do this on my own. You know, and you got these CEOs, these women, and they're running things, and that's awesome. But I also think we have to really think about having the discussion and properly going through the motions of like, okay, what does it look like to have a family and be ambitious and be successful and not burn people out or expect them to accept the responsibilities that I chose. There has to be that, because I think, again, something that I've done with my clients is I do something called a psychological offload.
Yes.
Right? Because what happens is if you're one of my clients and I know all the things you got going on. You got the spiritual piece, the social piece, the career piece, the family piece. You got all these things. With me, you have to be able to offload all of that stuff so you can be fully present. And that's not even talking about dealing with me, but even when you're leaving me, it's like, hey, all that stuff stays here. Put it in your little suitcase.
That's right.
Shut that thing up, lock it up, so that when you walk into that space, you can be fully present with the individual that you know, whether it's a romantic, you know, person or if it's a constituent or whatever the case may be. But being fully present is a big part of it. And I think from a family perspective, the daughters and the sons and the things that come along with having a family, we gotta be able to address that as well, because we are very ambitious. We got a lot that we want to accomplish. So the off days are like very few in between.
There are no off days. Let's just be clear about that, okay? There are no off days, right? And I think that's why I say, you know, just some grace, because listen, we are all experiencing issues, problems, and you would never even know. You know, people look at me, you would be surprised of what's happening at my house, right? Because I step out, you know, and I'm not broadcasting, you know, what's happening at my house with my family or issues that we're struggling with, because guess what? We're real, we're human, you know, elected officials, we are people too, and we have real issues and problems too, right? And so I think that's why I say grace, because we need to have a understanding. Listen, we all have issues, we all have problems, right? But we're trying to do the very best we can in our spaces to do this work.
So a couple more things, and then, you know, we'll start to close out. But when it comes to having grace and you being a real person, I think, again, in this time and space that we're experiencing collectively, there is this battle of perfection. And there's an expectation that on Instagram you don't have pimples, that your skin is flawless, and that your family is perfect, your kids are well behaved. Some people will dismiss you if you don't know the answer to a question. How do you? Is there a balance there, or are you just kind of you stick to your brand? You understand that I'm not perfect. I need grace. I'm going to keep pushing and doing the job.
And I'm always learning. You know, that's the thing. You know, one of the things that I enjoy most about my job, you know, being president of Akron City Council, is actually just walking in the neighborhoods, just talking with people. Right? I learned so much just having, again, conversations. Again, that's where we get connection. That's how we're really able to build community. You know, and so for me, conversations are really important. I'm always learning. You know, I don't have all the answers. And so we just have to make sure that we keep the conversations going.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that's most important. We got to keep talking.
Are you allowed to be human? Are you allowed, like, can you be human in front of people?
Listen, I am human. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. You know?
I just say that from the perspective of, I think, again, people, they look at celebrities, they look at people in your position, and then there's this kind of like element of like, I think, again, it's refreshing when people are real. When you slip up, when you're like, it's like, okay, I can actually deal with this person. I could talk to people. I don't want no perfect friends. I always say that. I say that all the time. If you are perfect, stay away from me.
Yes.
Because that's scary.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? If you ain't got no mistakes, nothing going on, if you ain't pick your nose once or twice, I don't know if I could be around you. Because for me, you hiding something that I don't know if I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
So in closing, personally, we're gonna follow up on the 4 burners, right? I certainly want to know, as you assess these things, what does that look like? Because you could easily be a case study, and figuring out how to be a woman in power, dealing with certain responsibilities, dealing with a family, or not, I shouldn't say dealing, but having a family, and also succeeding in the areas that you're succeeding in, and then also being like, I'm gonna prioritize myself in this season.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, where can people find you? I mean, we know the obvious places, Monday at 6:30, but where can people find you if they need to find you? What are some things that are really important to you right now? And then, what do you want people to take away from this interview?
Yeah, so you can definitely find me Monday nights, 6:30, downtown for sure. But I'm always available. Listen, and I want people to know that I am approachable. You see me in the grocery store or wherever out, stop, let's have a conversation. I'm always open to having a conversation.
Be careful what you ask for.
Listen, this is what I signed up for. I'm all for it.
For
you
sure,
know what I mean?
for
I
sure.
love it. Once a month we do hold a monthly board meeting every third Thursday at Ed Davis Community Center. So again, you can find me there. You can find me at Sommerville Funeral Services, and come into my office and meet me there as well. So for me, it's really important that I am accessible. I always have said that I have an open door policy. So yes, for sure.
Okay. And what do you want people to take away from this interview, if anything?
I think the thing that I want people to take away from this interview is that
Conversation, not an interview.
Coffee and conversations,
You know what I'm saying?
right? That's right.
That's right.
And I think that's what I want people to kind of take away from it, that, right? We have to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Even though we disagree, even though you might feel that you have a personal issue with me, right? Just to be open and to be willing to come to the table, right? And let's have a conversation about it. I think that is what is so important. Again, we have to see how we can close the divide. We can do so much more collectively when working together versus you doing what you're doing on this side and you doing what, you know what I mean? We got to figure out how we can come together. And I think it's around coffee is a good starting place, right? Of how we can build connections. Again, connections help us build a stronger community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep talking, Let's figure out how we can even bring folks together that in any other circumstance, we'd be like, you know what, this might not be a good idea.
Yeah.
But let's bring them together, even with a cup of coffee, and see how we can bridge the divide.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate you. Thank you for having this conversation.